Now, you may have seen this in the news, you might have seen it in social media feed, but there are lots of people, or a growing number of people, who want Britain to return to its Christian roots. Now, some people will answer, well, we never really were, or, well, we're glad we've moved on from that now. Others, perhaps it's a bit of a nostalgic thing. And still others, they see a change in our society, even over recent decades, and think there's something missing. And so we have this rise of what some people have called cultural Christianity. And some people like that badge. You know, I don't believe that Jesus is risen on the right hand of the Father, but I'm a cultural Christian. And then Christians debate as to whether this is a good or a bad moment. And I think it's neither, but it is an opportunity. And I think, like so many things, we can turn the question back on people who say that, but also when we do so, we turn the question back on ourselves. Do we think that CPC, or Britain, or whatever particular denomination, or the church generally, do we think we're special? Now, I have heard over the years, from time to time, people say, oh, CPC is special. We're talking about the sort of warmth, the fellowship, that kind of thing. But do you think you really are special? Do we think that God owes us something, any of those groups? Are we entitled to things more than other people? And part of the answer that we will come up with depends on who do you think God is? What do you think God is like? When people speak of God's mercy and his love, often it functions as a sort of a filter that precludes anything else about him, like his justice or his judgment. Often, even speaking of myself, when we speak of God's judgment, I just come over with this awkward feeling. And people look at us like, well, just how unreasonable. What kind of God is that? Not so much to do with the justice, but it just sounds like a temper tantrum. And this parable in front of us goes some way to explain what God is like in his mercy and his love and his fairness and his judgment. But also the issue that Jesus is addressing here is if anyone has a claim on God and the blessings from God. So I want us to walk through the parable and notice a few interesting things as we do. And then we're going to ask three questions. What does the parable say about God, those that Jesus spoke to, and about us? So first, let's look at the parable. The parable starts in verse 1 with Jesus telling a parable. So what do we mean by that? A parable is a story with a spiritual truth, and it's about a vineyard and tenants. Now, in the Old Testament, frequently there's this image of God as the owner and the farmer of Israel, which is the vineyard. And we saw that when a couple of years ago, we looked at Song of Songs, picks up in some of the Psalms. Ezekiel has a lot of this sort of imagery, but especially Isaiah 5, which is what I read it a minute ago, because lots of the words are the same, and the description is the same. So a tower, dug, winepress, fence around, all those things are the same words. And the similarity between Isaiah 5 and Mark 12 also shows us a difference. In Isaiah 5, when the vineyard has no fruit, and Isaiah, or God through Isaiah says, well, what would be reasonable for me to do? The prophet is warning about wayward Israel. And what goes on in Isaiah is they are then exiled for 70 years. They're taken out of the vineyard for 70 years. But then they're brought back. Here, the difference is that repeatedly the owner gives second chances again and again and again and again. And so the emphasis in Mark 12 is the patience and mercy of the owner. But eventually it ends and they are exiled, but they're exiled in a final way. They are ended. And so it gives us a framework then to understand the rest of the parable. So verse 2, the season comes and it's the time for harvest, that means. And so the owner is meant to get his share. They take some of it, he takes some of it. So he sends a servant to collect. In verse 3, the tenants beat him up and send him away empty-handed. In verses 4 to 5, servant after servant is sent, and they're either beaten up, mocked, or killed. Now, quick survey of the Old Testament, and that's exactly what happens, isn't it? That's the story. Prophet after prophet goes to Israel with God's word and warns them. Each is battered, bashed, mocked, or killed. Who would want to be a prophet? It's funny that now they have people who claim to be prophets, and I was thinking, I don't see the bruises. Perhaps you know a landlord, or perhaps you have been one where this has happened, where the tenants act as if they own the place. Well, actually, if they own the place, they probably treat it better, and they stop paying rent. They treat the place badly, and they don't let you in. And that's not reasonable, is it, by any standard? You know, it's a simple agreement. I bought this place. You can stay in it, and you pay me this, and then I'll do the repairs when it's necessary. And people just go, no, I want more out of it. And you're just trying to be a nice landlord, or the person you know is just trying to be a nice landlord. And that helps us to relate to God's situation, doesn't it? That how more reasonable could God be? What is unreasonable about God's request? Remember, he is the owner. And in the parallel, Israel has no specific rights. They've been entrusted with this responsibility, and they're not paying their terms. But notice God's patience with them. How he puts up with them. And then verse 6, he said, still one other, a beloved son. Finally, he sent him, saying, they will respect my son. He sends his son. Now, this elevates the whole thing, doesn't it? It elevates the authority that he's going with. This isn't just an employee. This is the son, the heir, and the stakes have gone up. And the tenants, though, don't treat the son with greater respect. Far from it. Verse 7. Once I found verse 7. But those tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. And so in verse 8, they kill him, and notice they cast him out of the vineyard. The one who owns the vineyard, they throw him out of the vineyard. Now, it's important to notice in verse 7 the reason why they kill him. They don't kill him out of ignorance. They kill him because they do recognize who he is and because of his identity. They're motivated that somehow if they remove the heir, it will be ours. And so Jesus asks, verse 9, what will the owner of the vineyard do? Just like God in Isaiah 5, what will the owner do? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Now, this is the different bit, another different bit to Isaiah 5. Here, there's no exile and return. This is the end. And the vineyard is given to others, not as tenants, but given. It becomes theirs. So the owner's judgment is entirely reasonable. And the tenant's actions have been building up and building up. He's been so merciful, and his final actions are entirely reasonable and predictable. Now, verses 10 and 11 we'll come back to, but having told the parable, he looks at his hearers, look at the hearers' response. Verse 12, and they were seeking to arrest him, but feared the people, for they perceived that he had told the parable against them. So they left him and went away. So notice they don't go, gosh, is that me? Rather, they double down. They're not called to their senses. They make it worse. Their response, in fact, confirms Jesus' words. If someone said something like this about you, go, well, go and show you. I'm going to disprove. I'm not like that at all. They confirm that what Jesus said is absolutely right. Now, given we can work out then in this parable who God is, that the owner's God, that the Son is Jesus, that the servants are the prophets, and the tenants are Israel, what do we learn about God, the first hearers, and so about us? And us, whether we are a Christian or not a Christian. It pretty much works out the same. So, what does it say about God? Well, there's many things that you could say about God, but there are three things from this parable. And they sort of hold together. So the first thing is, he is the owner with absolute rights. He made everything and he owns everything. But he's been so generous in how he shares it. And he's self-giving, and the way he gives to the tenants. It's generous. But he is the owner. And he therefore sets the rules. He has the authority to make the moral rules. He created things. He knows how they work best. They are reasonable. He has an insight that we don't have. And it's all in accordance with his good character. And it's just so obvious, the reasonableness of the owner in this parable. He's not asked for anything outlandish, so he is the owner. Second thing is, he is merciful and patient. The tenants have spectacularly broken their terms and conditions. And they have ignored warning after warning. And what is God like? He sends another warning, and then another. And even when the prophets are killed, I mean, what would you do if you sent an employee and they got killed? He sends another one. Ultimately, he sends his own son. Now, here it seems to be, who knows what will happen with the son, but we know, don't we, from everything else Jesus has said in Mark, that both the Son and the Father know that when the Son enters the world, it's a ticking clock till he goes to the cross. He comes to go to the cross. They know where it's heading. And so the owner is within his right to wipe them out, as he does in Isaiah 5. But he is so merciful and patient. But the third thing we see here is that he is just, and he does bring judgment ultimately. And judgment is good news, in fact. It is good that there's judgment to come. We know that there's a lot wrong in the world, and it will be righted. That's good news. The problem is that we're tangled in what is wrong. And we've seen that God has the right to judge, but he is so patient, but he is right to eventually call time. And you can't call his judgment, therefore, unjust or off the handle. It is, in fact, a moral necessity in keeping with his character. And it's after so much patience. That's what God is like from the parable. And what does that tell us about Jesus' first hearers? Well, Israel had been constantly warned by the prophets. If you've ever read an Old Testament, bit of Old Testament narrative with a very young child, they go, Israel sinned again. And that's kind of the point. They were in a privileged position as God's covenant people, but they had presumed on that status, and now they've reached the end of the road. So the parable shows that their place in the kingdom has been removed. They've been taken, and it's then given to others, and given in a way that seems to be more than they had as tenants. And Jesus will go on to talk about this more in Mark's Gospel. In chapter 13, he will talk about how the Israel of his day will lose the temple, lose the land, and lose their place of privilege. The modern state of Israel is same name, same place, but a very different beast to Jesus' day, and certainly that of the Old Testament. And that's what many Orthodox Jews think. They think that Israel, nice place that it is, they're waiting for the time for the Messiah to come and establish it properly. So the Jews, as Jesus is speaking this, they know that he's speaking about them, and they turn on Jesus. So what does that then tell us about us in this parable? And I think it's the same warning if you're a Christian and if you're not a Christian. So Israel, in many ways, as you go through the Old Testament, you look at the whole Old Testament story, is like a microcosm of how God deals with the world. We are in God's world. It is his. He owns it. He calls the shots. The church is a place and a people of special privilege of how we've experienced God. But the church is always in danger, every generation, of presuming on God. Especially relevant for those who talk about how we want it to be a Christian land. When I was preparing this, I'd forgotten about this quote, but it's a great quote from the first Bishop of Liverpool, J.C. Ryle, writing in the mid-1800s. And he says this, and we too, I think it's on this passage actually, and we too, who live in Great Britain, can we say that we have received no special mercies from God? We cannot say so. Why are we not a heathen country like China? Why are we not like a land of idolaters like Hindustan, old word for India? We owe it all to the distinguishing favor of God. It is not for our goodness and worthiness, but God's free grace, that England is what England is among the nations of the earth. Let us be thankful for our mercies and know the hand from which they come. Let us not be high-minded, but humble, lest we provoke God and take our mercies away. If Israel had peculiar national privileges, so also has England. Let Englishmen mark this well, and take heed, lest that which has happened to Israel should happen also to them. Now, some of our privileges obviously aren't the same as Israel's, but nonetheless, we have had, if you read any history of the last 500 years or longer, a great privileged history to do with our Christian heritage. Now, what's striking about those words that struck me is most churches I've been in has had a number of Indians, Chinese, Africans, that J.C. Ryle, at the time he's writing, could call pagan idolaters. So we have a Nigerian here. I studied with a Nigerian bishop who told me in the 90s that there are more Nigerian missionaries in England than there are European missionaries in Africa, or something ridiculous statistic like that. You know, we know about this, the growth in China, India, other places, that 140 years ago we could call them pagan. Now look at the church in England and look at the church in those countries. They have way surpassed us. They've way overtaken us. So they're sending missionaries to us while the church here stalls. And we can say, you know, I read this a lot. People go, oh, well, that's the liberal churches. Evangelical churches, they don't have these problems. Which evangelical churches have they been going to? Of course, we all have the same problems. That's actually part of the root of the problem, thinking we don't have a problem. Why has this happened in England? And believe me, Scotland and Wales aren't doing any better. In part, it's complex, but in part, it is our presumption. The church, we just go, the church will always be here, and I'm British. You know, so you say to someone, well, are you a Christian? Have you put your trust in Jesus? Well, I'm British. I think that will do. It won't do. And people might say there will always be a church, and there will always be a church. But Christ warns, I might remove your lampstand, though. Why do you think you're special? Look at verses 10 to 11. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. The rejected one is the one who holds the whole thing together. And his rejection is what brings us salvation. The one who was cast out of the vineyard, the one who was cast out of the city wall and crucified and cast out of life, did so in our place so that we would not be cast away. But the starting point is to not presume our place inside the wall in the vineyard, but to see that our place there is an act of pure grace. And so if you don't know Jesus, come to him now, not as a tenant, but as an heir in Christ, and allowed to stay in his inheritance with a status of being a son in him. The choice is simple, isn't it? Reject him or keep denying him and just dithering, and you will be cast out. Receive him and he receives you. But if you call yourself a Christian, then what does it look like to do this in an ongoing sense? Well, it means just what we've been looking at for the last several weeks in Mark's Gospel. It means deny yourself, take up your cross, and live with Jesus as the king, as the ultimate boss, and he calls the shots and you don't. That is the opposite to presumption. The way to Jesus is not what I deserve, but open-handed. Come and receive. And in a moment, we're going to share the Lord's Supper together, which is a visible, tangible way that we come open-handed with nothing else that we offer.